I've been told that my task is just to talk for a little bit and get things started, and I'm actually really curious to hear everyone's thoughts on how you create a philosophical culture in the home, in part because I take myself to have done it in one way, which was successful for a while, but once my kids were onto it, became a little bit less successful. So I'm curious to hear how other people might go about it. I think you might distinguish like both like two ways of going about it. One is passive or reactive, and then the other is active, something that you might try to organize. So what do I mean by passive or reactive? Well, it's kind of an article of faith of mine that and Jana's that all kids are philosophers. It's not something they need us to teach them to be. It's something they need support for that they're already doing. But what goes along with that is if you listen carefully to the things your kids say, and especially to the questions that they ask, you're going to hear philosophical questions. Sometimes you'll hear philosophical questions that will just present themselves as philosophical. One day we were at dinner, sitting at dinner when my older son Rex was 4, and he just asked, how do I know that I'm not dreaming my entire life? Now, he had not encountered Descartes or Zhuangzi or any of the philosophers that had asked this question before. He just had this question on his own. I think lots of children do. And, I heard it as a philosopher would hear it. And I tried to, I didn't tell him about Descartes right away. I asked him, well, if you're dreaming, where do you think you are? And then we had a conversation and we tried to figure out whether there was a way to test it. I did eventually tell him that there were other people that had wondered about this. So sometimes it's going to happen like right on the surface of things. If you know a little bit of philosophy, you'll recognize that your kids are struggling with traditional questions. Other times, there are questions that they'll ask that pose an opportunity for philosophical reflection if you just push a little bit. When I was little, I liked for some reason to ask what the best of things were. What's the best song? What's the best painting? And my father would just give me an opinion, right? He told me the best song was Rhapsody in Blue. I don't know what he thought the best painting was, but that was, if you're interested in creating a philosophical culture, a missed opportunity because he could have asked questions. He could have said, well, do you think there's just one best song? Or what would it mean? What would make a song the best song? And then we would have been off and running on a conversation about aesthetics. But so one way to create a philosophical culture in your home is just to listen carefully to what kids' questions are. A second way to create a philosophical culture is to ask them for their views about things. So sometimes you'll be asking them for their views in response to the question they've asked, right? My older son, my younger son Hank, who is now 13 years old and on to me, I used to just reflect every question back at him. He'd ask a question, I'd say, "What do you think?" and try and get him to answer before I offered an opinion. Then I say he got on to me. Now he knows what I'm up to. So if I ask a question, he just instantly says, "Well, I don't know. What do you think?" and tries to do it back to me. But I think like a key part I said of like supporting your kids in their philosophical endeavors is showing them that you care about what their views are, that you listen, that you're interested, that you ask about them, that, when they share a view, you don't tell them that it's wrong, at least not right away, that you ask them questions about it, that you try and get them to think about it, right? Maybe playing a little bit law professor to lead them to the realization that something doesn't make sense about what they said, but not to just tell them things, but really to take them seriously as thinkers, to ask questions, to ask follow-up questions. One thing I've tried to do as my kids got older and they're on to me is I won't ask a question myself, but I'll present the question as something that somebody else is wondering about. Oh, I had this conversation with my students and we're really struggling with it. What do you think about this? Or, I once got asked to answer philosophy questions from kids by the Guardian newspaper in the UK. And I took those questions and I sat down and I asked my kids to help me with them, right? And so that, oh, there's a girl who's wondering, um, actually, there was a girl with a really profound question. She was wondering if there's a mommy and a daddy and their child dies, are they still a mommy and a daddy? Right. And so, I treated my children like they were the Dear Abby philosophers. Can you help me answer this other person's question? So I think letting them know there's somebody besides you who wants to know the answer will often, and I found this worked at older ages, will often enlist them in trying to sort things out with you. And then, like on the more, so I guess maybe that's a little bit more active. The other thing I think is good to do that's in the more active category is to take advantage of some of the resources. There's the Prindle Institute of Ethics has a website called Teaching Children Philosophy. There's lots of great resources through Plato as well. Teaching children philosophy is something I used all the time when I was the parent of young children because they've got picture book modules that for many of the most popular picture books that explain both what are philosophical questions raised in this book and give a little primer for the adult who's going to be reading the book with the children. And then they'll have 8 or 10 questions. That's too many for any given night's story, but they'll have 8 or 10 questions you might ask your child as you read. And I would very quickly look at those modules before I would read my children a book from the list and pick 1 or 2 of those questions that I might pose in the middle of the story. Or, you can do it even if you haven't seen a module. You're reading a story and a character reaches a decision about what to do. You can pause and say, what would you do and why? And get them to think alongside the characters. One of my favorite iterations of this is uh, oh my gosh, have I forgotten the name of the book? Well, it's not Ferdinand because Ferdinand's a bull. It's Frederick. There's a children's book named Frederick that tells the story of mice that are gathering food and provisions for the winter, all except for Frederick, who tells them that he's gathering colors and words, and he's not helping gather the food. And then, as the winter comes and things are getting bad, and the mice have eaten all the food that they had gathered for the winter, and they're cold and they're hungry, somebody says to Frederick, where are these words that you gathered? And Frederick stands up on a stone and he recites the poem that he wrote as winter was coming, and everyone is sort of warmed and sustained by Frederick's words. And so there's all kinds of questions you can ask kids about this. You can ask them, was Frederick doing work, right? What is work, right? Is poetry a kind of work? Was it fair that he was gathering words when other people were gathering food? Did words have the same value as food? What's the value of poetry? And you don't have to have all those conversations in one evening, but children like to read the same books over and over again. So you can go back to these stories and really have, the same sorts of conversations that adults have with children, and they will be creative and insightful. So you can be proactive about it. But I think the main message I've got is you don't have to be. You just have to support them where they are because they are philosophers. And all they need is some indication from you that that's a valuable thing to be. So I'll stop there, and I want to hear how you guys do this.